Once I witnessed a cadet dying, and the strongest members of the academy simply stood around and laughed until one cadet, one person, stepped forward. She was calm, almost silent, and at that moment the laughter stopped, once and for all. My name is Instructor Cale Morick, and for 17 standard cycles, I have been teaching young recruits the intricacies of combat operations at the Federation Military Academy. For all these 17 years, I have been watching young soldiers from hundreds of different worlds trying to prove their worth among the stars. All this time, I have done nothing but break the arrogance of the self-confident and train those who had at least some ability. Honestly, I was convinced that I had seen every possible manifestation of strength and weakness that exists in this galaxy. But how wrong I was. Let me describe the place where it all started. The Academy itself is located on Astra Prime. It is a neutral planet, chosen for one purpose. Its climate is equally hostile to every living creature. It is too hot for the Serenians, too cold for the Morgats, too much gravity for the Ilvarians, and catastrophically, too little for the Noxians. Here, everyone suffers equally, and that's the whole point. The leadership believes that shared suffering tempers character, and frankly, they're not entirely wrong. It is in the combat simulation chambers that cadets either prove their worth or fly out of here, weeping for their home planets. These chambers are capable of recreating any battlefield in known space. Want a toxic atmosphere? You got it. A ship boarding in zero gravity? Or an underwater battle under extreme pressure? No problem. In theory, the safety protocols there should be flawless. At least, that's what they say. But when you push the equipment to its limits, trying to simulate extreme conditions for 70 different species at once, the technology sometimes fails. It happens extremely rarely, but it does happen. Now I'll tell you something that is usually left out of the recruitment commercials. There is an unspoken hierarchy at the Academy, a kind of social pyramid based purely on how weak others consider you to be. At the very top are the Vorics, who have natural armor and 4 powerful arms. Just below them are the Centaur Hunters, who are incredibly fast and have poison. Next come the middle class, species that have certain advantages but also obvious vulnerabilities. And at the very bottom are the support species, those who usually become engineers, medics, or logisticians. They are the ones who are bullied on the training grounds and openly laughed at in the dining halls. Officially, no such hierarchy exists. The Academy will deny it to the last, but every instructor knows the truth. Most of us consider it natural selection in action. The weak must know their place. The strong learn to lead. That's how any military structure in this part of the cosmos works. At least, that's what I thought. But then people appeared, and my entire understanding of strength turned out to be, to put it mildly, incomplete. Cadet Sar was an Eldrin. Imagine a guy almost 8 feet tall with so much muscle mass that any forklift would be jealous. His ancestors lived on a planet with enormous gravity, so everything there grows strong and sturdy. Eldrin could punch through steel plating with their bare hands if they swung hard enough, and their bones could withstand blows that would turn anyone else into mincemeat. But, and this is a very important but, they were slow. Not dull, but physically slow. Their nervous system simply couldn't work as fast as other species. In open combat, where there is time to prepare a strike, an Eldrin is a real nightmare. But in dynamic combat, when threats come from all sides, Saru was in trouble. I watched him every day in the simulators. He tried his best to compensate for what nature had given him. Saru studied scenarios for hours, memorizing every possible attack, trying to take the right position in advance. Sometimes it worked, but more often than not, it didn't. And every time he made a mistake or received a simulated injury that would have been fatal in real combat, the other cadets noticed. Corell tried the hardest. He was a Warwick, and like most of his kind, he behaved like a rare, cocky bastard. 4 arms meant 4 weapons in close combat. His natural armor meant that small arms fire didn't even scratch him. Add to that lightning-fast reflexes and a herd instinct, Vorix acted as a single, coordinated organism in battle. Cruel led a gang of 5 other Vorix. They walked around the academy as if it belonged to them, and, to be honest, in many ways it did. They called Sarah a shooting target, a moving obstacle, and a bunch of other words that I won't repeat here. They constantly tripped him in the hallways. They stole his equipment before inspections, and during joint training sessions, they deliberately put him in situations where he was guaranteed to lose so they could laugh at him to their heart's content. Sar never complained, not once. He just kept working even harder, hoping that if he became better, the bullying would stop. His stubbornness commanded respect, true, but it also made him the perfect victim for those who enjoy other people's suffering. And then, one ordinary morning, people arrived on transport from Earth. There were 12 of them in total, the first group of human cadets to be admitted to service in the Federation. Their species had joined us only 3 cycles ago, and the debate about whether they were capable of anything militarily was still raging. I was in the landing dock when they came down the gangway doing my usual assessment of the newcomers. In this job, you quickly learn to identify potential. You look at their posture, how they move, their reactions, how they read threats. It usually takes me 30 seconds to figure out whether a cadet will make it to graduation or fail miserably. And to be completely honest with you, these people look just pathetic. No natural armor, no claws, no poison glands, not even spare organs. And their bone density was so low that it seemed they could break something just by stumbling awkwardly. These people had nothing. No prehensile tails for balance, no hypersensitive organs, no ability to see in infrared or ultraviolet light, just soft, fragile creatures. One of them was very tiny, about 5 feet tall, with dark hair pulled back in a tight knot and large brown eyes that seemed too big for her face. Her name was Lena Myers. When I first opened her personnel file, I almost burst out laughing. Qualified emergency medical technician, hand-to-hand combat expert, psychological operations specialist, it looked as if someone had blindly mixed 3 completely different professions into one. What kind of species teaches its soldiers to be doctors, executioners, and fighters at the same time? It seemed like the height of inefficiency. The other cadets thought the same. Whispers immediately spread around the corners. Sacrificial lambs, inhabitants of the world of death, who survived only because no one higher up noticed them. But the Vorix were particularly harsh. Corell muttered something about people only being good for paperwork or carrying trays in the kitchen. His gang just burst out laughing. Lena Myers heard every word. I noticed how she looked at Corell. She held her gaze for exactly 2 seconds, no more. No anger, no fear, no reaction at all. She just filed the information away in some internal archive and moved on. During briefings, she always sat in the back and remained silent. She didn't ask questions or try to get to know anyone. She just watched. I had a strange feeling that she was scanning and memorizing everyone, every face, every voice, every potential threat in that room. It made me feel uncomfortable, although I couldn't explain why. It all happened in the third week of basic training. We gathered 40 cadets in the 7th chamber for a standard combat drill in urban conditions. The teams were mixed, the scenarios were random, and the difficulty was medium. Nothing foreshadowed trouble. That day, the chamber simulated a high-pressure atmosphere like in the Brellian colonies. The pressure was twice the standard, which put a lot of strain on the heart and blood vessels and made it difficult to move. We tried to make the conditions as equal as possible for everyone as far as that was possible. The task was simple: clear a multi-story building of enemies. The cadets were doing quite well. Sar was in a group with Scouts Tear and a sensor tracker. Not the best company for his size, as his allies were too fast, but he tried not to fall behind. I watched everything from the observation bridge along with the other instructors, monitoring vital signs and movements on the monitors. And then the security system malfunctioned. One of the combat drones, which was only supposed to simulate suppressive fire, suddenly went crazy. Instead of training rounds, which simply register hits on the armor sensors, it began firing real kinetic projectiles. The caliber was small, but the bullets were real. The drone latched onto Sar, probably because he was the largest target in the room. Sar was hit 3 times in the torso before he even realized what was happening. Eldrin's skin is tough, but not armored. The bullets passed through it, and blue blood instantly spread across his training uniform. He collapsed as if he had been mowed down, and the sound of his huge body hitting the floor of the chamber rolled all the way to our bridge. I immediately hit the emergency stop button, but the locks were jammed too. It was a cascading system failure. The doors wouldn't open. The simulation continued, Sar bleeding on the floor, and the malfunctioning drone circling overhead, looking for a new victim. The cadets scattered, looking for cover just as they had been taught, all except the Voriks, who were on the opposing team. Cruel and his gang were sitting on the 3rd level, and from there they had a great view of the wounded Sar, and they started laughing. I heard it through the audio link, that characteristic Vorik chuckle. Cruel exclaimed that Sar had finally found his ideal position, face down on the floor. Another workwist suggested leaving him there as a reference point for other breaking cadets. The others joined in the laughter. The Hectarians shouted something about Eldriniv's weakness, and the Scout Tyre condescendingly muttered something about natural selection. The mockery spread through the chamber like an infection. All this time, Sar was dying, and half the group was joking because that's what the hierarchy had taught them. Mock the weak, demonstrate your strength, trample on those below you. I yelled into the microphone, trying to bypass the door lock, while the other instructors ran to the manual levers. We were locked in and forced to watch through the armored glass as our cadet bled to death to the accompaniment of his classmates' laughter. And then Lena Myers moved. She didn't run headlong toward Sarah. That would have made her an easy target for the drone. She moved in a low crouch, using the terrain and cover like a veteran after dozens of battles. Her movements were so precise and economical that it seemed impossible for such a small creature. She covered 10 meters of open space in less than 10 seconds, and the drone didn't even detect her. Reaching Sarah, she fell to her knees and immediately began examining the wounds. Her hands moved with surgical precision, checking the bullet entry points, assessing blood loss, applying pressure to the wounds. I watched her vitals on the monitor, waiting for panic. A racing heart, shortness of breath, a surge of adrenaline, the usual mammalian response to fear. But there was nothing. Her pulse rose slightly but remained steady. Her breathing was calm and controlled. Her hands didn't tremble a millimeter. She took off her jacket and began tearing it into strips, so quickly and confidently as if she had done it 1,000 times before. Her voice sounded calm and steady through the speakers. First, she whispered something to Sar in her strange human language, then switched to universal galactic. "Hang in there, friend. Everything will be fine. We'll pinch the wounds, stop the bleeding, and stabilize you until the door opens. Nothing complicated. Just breathe, okay?" Sar looked at her in confusion. He probably couldn't understand why this tiny creature was trying to help him, while everyone else just stood and stared. Lena had already rolled up part of her jacket, pressed it against the deepest wound, and leaned on it with all her weight to create the necessary pressure. With her free hand, she removed his belt with incredible speed, unlike what you'd expect from a cadet after 3 weeks of training, and began to apply a tourniquet to the upper part of Sar's torso. "The bleeding is slowing down," she said into the void, her voice clearly carried by the camera. "2 wounds are superficial, 1 is deep, but the large vessels are not affected. He has time." Just then, Crowell's voice rang out again from above. "Look at this human girl playing doctor. Tell me, victim, are you already training for your future job? You clearly don't belong in battle, so maybe carrying ducks is just your level?" His gang chuckled approvingly. The other cadets also joined in the laughter. They saw a great opportunity to mock someone even weaker than Sarah. Lena didn't even look up. She took real medical supplies out of her backpack — it turned out she had been carrying them with her the whole time — and began to apply a proper pressure bandage instead of pieces of her jacket. Her fingers worked perfectly. Tuck, wrap, secure. Sarah's blue blood was everywhere, on her hands, on her uniform, but she didn't seem to notice the mess. "You're doing great," she said to Sarah in the same impossibly calm voice. "Blood pressure is under control, skin color is normal, breathing is stable. You'll walk out of here on your own 2 feet, maybe with a headache from all the paperwork, but nothing more." She applied 3 separate pressure points, using everything at hand, from the remains of her uniform to pieces of equipment. The bleeding had almost stopped. She checked Sarah's pulse on her neck, gave herself a quick nod, and finally looked at Crawl and his gang. "The door will open soon," she said without emotion. "When that happens, the medics will come in. I need 2 cadets to help drag him closer to the exit. Any volunteers?" The response was silence. No one moved. Crawl laughed again. "Why on earth should we help the weak? Natural selection doesn't work that way, kid. The strong survive, the slow bleed to death. You'd better learn that lesson before your soft victim instinct kills someone." Lena stared at him for a long time, then said quietly, "All right." That one word sent a chill down my spine. Carell began to descend from the 3rd level with his trademark confident gait, swinging all 4 arms. His gang followed behind him. Vorix always moved in groups. They walked deliberately slowly through the hall, so that everyone could see them approaching the person who had dared to ignore their taunts. "It seems you don't understand your place, human," Cruel hissed as he approached. "You're not a soldier, you're barely a cadet. So when I say to leave this loser and let nature take its course, you listen." Lena did not remove her hand from Sarah's wound. She did not even turn around. "He's stable. If we move him now without proper support, the bleeding will start again. The medics will be here in 2 minutes. We'll wait." Carell stretched out both arms and grabbed Lena by the shoulders, intending to simply push her away from the wounded man. "I said drop him!" What happened next took less than 3 seconds. Lena's left arm flew up, her fingers straight as spears. She struck the nerve cluster below Carell's right elbow. His grip instantly loosened, and Lena's right hand was already flying toward his torso. The blow with her palm was not so much devastating as it was perfectly calculated to knock him off balance. As he backed away, she spun around while remaining on her knees and swept his legs out from under him, using his own weight against him. Krill fell heavily onto his back, his armor clattering against the floor. And then Lena was back in her previous position, her hand pressed against Sarah's wound as if nothing had happened. Her breathing hadn't even faltered. I looked at the monitors. Her pulse had barely risen. "I'm keeping the pressure on," she said calmly to Sarah. "It's okay, just a minor setback." Cruel jumped to his feet, all 4 arms trembling with rage, the plates of his armor opening in a threatening stance. "You dared to touch me, animal." Lena's voice suddenly changed, flat, cold. All the warmth with which she had spoken to Sarah was gone. "Back off. Last warning." The other 4 Voriks began to surround her. The pack always relied on numbers and coordination. They thought they were hunting. They thought they had cornered a weak, frightened creature. I could see it in their posture, in the confidence of their movements. "You can't stop all of us, little human," Carell hissed. 4 arms against 2. It's simple math." "Last chance," Lena repeated. Her hand was still on Sarah's wound, but her body had shifted slightly. She had shifted her center of gravity the way pros do before the real meat grinder begins. "Just go away." They attacked all at once, straight out of the textbook, just as they had been taught, and just as the tactics of the Vorik pack dictated. 2 from the front, 2 from the flanks, a devastating force coming at them from all sides at once. But Lena became the embodiment of graceful violence. She dove under the first Vorik's grasp, slammed her elbow into his throat, and instantly used his body as a shield against the attacker on her left. Her legs, lightning fast, knocked out the right attacker's knee. The joint twisted with such a crack that he fell to the floor with a wild scream. The 4th managed to grab her from behind, thinking he had won, but she threw her head back sharply, hitting him square in the face, spun around in his grip, and with a short, vicious blow to his solar plexus, forced him to double over. The first Vorkus was just coming to his senses, but she caught his arm in mid-air, pulled him toward her, and twisted his joint so that he had a choice, either fall or lose his shoulder. He chose the floor, a wise decision. The second one was still trying to get to her through his knocked-down comrade, but Lena simply let go of the first one and knocked the support out from under his feet with a precise blow. Both fell into a pile of metal, armor, and limbs. Cruel lunged at her, spreading all 4 arms, but she simply stepped aside, grabbed one of his arms, and, using his own momentum, sent the leader of the pack flying into a pile of his minions. The whole thing took exactly 8 seconds. 5 Voriks lay on the floor, moaning and writhing. One person was still kneeling next to Sarah, pressing his hand firmly against the wound. His breathing was steady. He was in complete control, and the pressure had not weakened one iota. "He's stable," Lena said, checking Sarah's pulse with her other hand. "Does anyone want to try again, or shall we wait for the medics like civilized beings?" A dead silence fell over the chamber, broken only by the panting of the Voriks, who were trying to gasp for air. Finally, the airlock doors hissed open, equalizing the pressure, and a team of medics rushed in with stretchers and equipment. I ran right behind them with the other instructors, preparing to see bloody chaos, panic, and a pile of victims. Instead, we saw a perfectly organized aid station. Sar was alive, his wounds professionally bandaged with improvised but effective bandages. 5 Voriks cadets were lying around. Nothing fatal, but they were all completely incapacitated. And Lena Myers was still kneeling next to Sar. Her uniform was soaked with blue blood, but her face remained calm and focused. The rest of the cadets literally pressed themselves against the walls of the cell, trying to stay as far away from Lena as possible. No one laughed. No one spoke. They just stared at the little person who had just proven that bullying has consequences. The medics got to work, and Lena began to give her report with professional precision. 3 gunshot wounds, 2 superficial, 1 deep in the lower left part of the torso. Bleeding was brought under control approximately 19 minutes ago. No signs of shock, breathing is stable, pulse is strong. Continuous pressure was maintained on the head wound throughout. Ready for transport. She said it in a tone as if she were reading the weather forecast. Dry, factual, without a hint of stress in her voice. The chief medic, a Hectarian with 30 years of experience, even froze, staring at her. "You're a first-year cadet, right?" he asked, clearly not believing his eyes. "Yes, sir," Lena confirmed. "That's field surgeon level." "Yes, sir. How long have you been studying medicine?" "Since I was 14, sir. Volunteer rescue service on Earth." "We start early there." The medic looked at her bloodied hands, her torn uniform, her steady breathing. Then he looked at me with an expression that said, "Who the hell did you bring to this academy?" I had no answer. As Sarah was being loaded onto the stretcher, he reached out his huge hand and touched Lena's shoulder. "Thank you," he said, barely audibly but sincerely. Lena nodded. "You would have done the same for me. That's what soldiers do." Then she stood up, glanced at the Voriks, who were still whimpering on the floor, and turned to me. "Instructor Morris, I have to report an incident. Cadet Krill and 4 members of his group tried to prevent emergency assistance from being given to a wounded soldier. When a verbal warning did not work, I used the minimum force necessary to neutralize the threat and continue the rescue of the patient. All of Voriksiv's injuries are not irreversible and will heal within the standard time frame. I take full responsibility for my actions." She stood straight, covered in someone else's blood, while 5 cadets twice her size groaned behind her. My scanner showed that her heartbeat was returning to normal. No trembling hands, no delayed shock or hysteria. That's when I finally understood who we were dealing with. People don't freeze when everything goes haywire. They don't panic when they see blood. They don't hesitate when they have to fight. Whatever evolutionary pressure tempered them on their death planet, it didn't create a fleeing victim or a hunting predator. it created something else. A creature that simply continues to do its job, regardless of the circumstances, regardless of the stress, regardless of how bad things are. They are not weak. They are not fragile. They are catastrophically, horrifyingly competent when everything around them is going to hell. The laughter in that room died, and looking at the faces of the other cadets, I knew it wouldn't return any time soon. They had learned a lesson that I was still trying to digest. Never, ever confuse softness with weakness. SAR spent 4 days in the medical center and made a full recovery. The Voriks stayed there for 2 days, treating their joints, torn tissues, and what the medical reports delicately referred to as serious bruises to their ego and social status. On the 3rd day, I saw Lena Myers walking toward the medical center. She was carrying a tablet and something that looked like Taurian meditation stones. In their culture, these helped to relieve pain. She sat with SAR for 2 hours. They talked quietly, and she helped him catch up on the lessons he had missed. When she left, SAR was sitting up straighter, and there was something new in his eyes. Maybe a goal, or maybe hope. That feeling you get when you realize you're not alone anymore. I spent those 3 days doing research. It was extremely important for me to understand what I had witnessed. I dug up everything the Federation had on human history, culture, and military doctrine. And the more I read, the more my hair stood on end. Humans had been at war throughout their recorded history. Thousands of years of constant conflict with each other, with their own nature, with threats we could barely imagine. But here's what made my blood run cold. They didn't divide combat roles the way every other species does. Most civilizations have warriors and healers. Separate castes, separate training, separate goals. You either learn to take life or to preserve it. These skills do not overlap because these worldviews are fundamentally incompatible. But not for humans. Human soldiers learn emergency medical care as a basic skill. Human medics learn combat operations as a foundation. They have a saying, something about every soldier being first and foremost a shooter, regardless of their specialty. They teach their warriors to save lives and their healers to take them. And they see no contradiction in this because on their planet of death, you need both of these skills just to live to see the morning. Lena Myers was not an anomaly. She was not some kind of specially gifted prodigy. She was the standard. Every person in that group of cadets had the same dual training, the same ability to switch instantly between caring and killing without hesitation, without moral crisis or psychological breakdown. They had been doing it for so long that it had become routine for them. I found records of human conflicts where medics stabilized wounded enemies and then returned to battle with their allies. Wars where field hospitals were set up in the line of fire. Situations where people performed operations under fire, broke through enemy lines to get the wounded, or carried their comrades for miles through enemy territory. On their planet, they were endurance hunters. They could pursue their prey until it fell from exhaustion. But at the same time, they were pack animals who protected their wounded. Social creatures who couldn't abandon their own, even when logic screamed, "Run!" Evolution gave them endurance and empathy in equal measure, and then their culture turned both of those traits into weapons. But the weakness we saw, that soft shell, those fragile bones, it was all camouflage, like those earth creatures that look like harmless leaves but carry poison, capable of knocking down a predator in seconds. Humans survived on their planet not because they became the biggest or the fastest, but because they became the most relentless, adaptive, and terrifyingly functional species their land had ever produced. Lena Myers graduated from the academy at the top of her class after 3 cycles. SAR came in 5th, specializing in heavy assault operations, and requested assignment to the same unit as Lena. Cruel barely graduated, and the last I heard, he was hauling cargo somewhere on the outskirts, far from the real action. No cadet ever laughed at another suffering in my presence again. The incident in Cell 7 became a legend that spread first throughout the Academy and then throughout the Federation's armed forces. Humans, those small, soft creatures we considered barely fit for service, became the standard by which all other species are now measured. The hierarchy still exists, of course, but it has shifted in ways I am still trying to comprehend. Strength is no longer about how hard you can hit or how many hits you can take. Now, it's about whether you can act when everything goes to hell. Can you save a life and end one in the same breath? Do you have that cold competence that keeps working while everyone else stands frozen in horror? I've been teaching here for 20 cycles now, 3 more than when this story began. And I've learned the most important lesson. People don't just survive on their death planet. They carry it with them everywhere, wrapped in this deceptively fragile packaging. They bring with them a crisis mentality, the dual nature of warrior-healer, and an absolute refusal to give up, even when it's the only logical choice. They are not the strongest in the Federation, not the fastest, and they have no natural weapons. But they may be the most dangerous precisely because they do not look like it. And this is a lesson that the galaxy is still learning, step by step, until the laughter subsides and respect takes its place.